The morning fog clung to the Aurelian slums like a shroud, thick and grey, carrying the stench of rot and cheap ale. Ryan kicked through a pile of refuse behind the tanner's yard, his fingers numb from the cold. He was a disgraced apprentice, cast out from Master Aldrich's forge 6 moons ago for a cracked blade that had cost a merchant's life. The memory still burned, the merchant's scream, the guard's accusation, and Master Aldrich's cold dismissal. "You bring shame to the hammer," the old man had said, and Ryan had walked away with nothing but a leather apron and a rusted pair of tongs. Now he scavenged for scrap, hoping to salvage enough iron to trade for a loaf of bread. His family, his mother and younger sister, depended on him, and the pittance he earned from mending broken pots barely kept them fed. He wiped sweat from his brow, the grime of the city settling into his pores like a second skin. A glint caught his eye beneath a heap of rotting cloth. He knelt, brushing aside the filth, and unearthed the sword. It was a pitiful thing, the blade was crusted with rust, the edge chipped and dull, the hilt wrapped in frayed leather that crumbled at his touch. But there was something in its weight, a balance that felt right. Ryan turned it over, and his heart skipped. Beneath the corrosion, faint ripples of silver traced the steel, patterns he had only seen in the old master's books, marks of folded mythril. He clutched the sword to his chest, his breath quickening. "Impossible," he whispered. But the echo forge stirred within him, a warmth kindling in his chest. It was a gift he had discovered by accident, a power that let him imprint memories into metal, but at a cost. Each use drained his life, days stolen from his future. He had used it sparingly, only to mend a broken lock or sharpen a knife. But this sword, it was a canvas. Ryan hurried to his shack, a ramshackle hovel at the edge of the slums. He barred the door, lit a single candle, and laid the sword on his anvil. The forge was cold, but the echo forge needed no fire. He placed his palm on the blade, closed his eyes, and let his mind sink into the metal. He remembered the first time he had held a hammer, the pride in his father's eyes before the fever took him. He remembered his mother's hands, calloused and warm, as she taught him to read. He remembered the shame of his exile, the weight of failure pressing on his shoulders. All of it poured into the sword, mingling with the latent echoes of the mithril. The blade began to glow, a soft azure light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Rust flaked away, revealing steel that shimmered like morning dew. The edge sharpened, honed to a razor's fineness. The hilt reformed, the leather weaving itself anew, inlaid with silver threads that glowed faintly. When the light faded, Ryan held a mithril blade worthy of a king. His reflection stared back from the polished surface, gaunt and weary, but with a spark of defiance in his eyes. He felt the cost, a weariness settled into his bones, a subtle ache that told him he had traded 10 days of his life for this beauty. A crash shattered the silence. The door burst open, and 3 men barged in, their faces hard with malice. The leader, a scarred brute named Garrick, grinned at the sword. Well, look what the gutter rat found. Hand it over, boy, and we'll let you keep your teeth." Ryan's heart pounded. He had no strength to fight them, no weapon but the sword. But the echo forge hummed in his chest, whispering an idea. He grabbed a scrap of iron from the floor, a bent nail, and focused on Garrick's face, the fear behind his bravado, the tremor in his hand as he reached for his knife. Ryan imprinted that fear into the nail, pouring his own desperation into the charm. The iron grew warm, twisting into a jagged shape. The cost hit him again, another day lost, but he ignored it. "Last chance," Garrick growled, stepping forward. Ryan held out the charm. "Take this instead. It's worth more than the sword." Garrick laughed, but his eyes flickered to the charm. He snatched it, and as his fingers closed around the metal, his face went pale. His bravado crumbled, replaced by a raw, primal terror. He dropped the charm, stumbling back, his hands shaking. "Get it away from me," he screamed, and fled, his cronies scrambling after him. Ryan collapsed against the anvil, gasping. The charm lay on the floor, cold and inert, but Garrick's scream still echoed in his ears. He had won, but at what cost? He picked up the mithril sword, its weight a promise and a burden. The clatter of hooves and wheels drew his gaze to the window. A royal carriage, gilded with the imperial crest, stopped before his shack. The door opened, and a herald in scarlet livery stepped out, his voice ringing through the slums. "By order of the imperial treasury, Ryan the smith is summoned to the palace. Refusal is punishable by death." Ryan's blood ran cold. The sword in his hand felt like a noose tightening around his neck. The carriage jolted through the cobblestone streets of the Aurelian capital, its gilded interior a stark contrast to the grime of the slums Ryan had left behind. The herald sat across from him, silent and watchful, his hand resting on the pommel of a ceremonial sword. Through the velvet curtains, Ryan caught glimpses of towering marble columns and statues of past emperors, their stone eyes judging him as he passed. The air grew heavy with the scent of incense and polished wood as the carriage slowed before an immense iron gate, its bars twisted into the shape of snarling dragons. The imperial treasury, a fortress of wealth and secrets, where every coin bore the weight of 1,000 lies. Guards in silver armor escorted him through a labyrinthine corridor, their footsteps echoing like drumbeats on the cold stone floor. Torches flickered in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows that seemed to reach for him. Ryan clutched the mythril blade hidden beneath his cloak, its cool presence a small comfort. The echo forge hummed faintly in his chest, a constant reminder of the price he had paid, and would pay again. They stopped before a pair of oak doors inlaid with gold filigree, depicting scenes of conquest and tribute. A herald announced his arrival, and the doors swung open to reveal a vast hall. The ceiling soared high above, painted with frescoes of gods and mortals locked in eternal struggle. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, casting prismatic light across the room. At the far end, behind a desk of polished obsidian, sat the spymaster. He was a lean man with sharp features and eyes the color of cold steel. His fingers drummed a slow rhythm on the desk, each tap a measured beat. A monocle gleamed on his right eye, and his lips curved into a smile that did not reach his gaze. "Ryan, the blacksmith's apprentice. I've heard much about your recent work." His voice was smooth, like oil on water. A mithril blade from a rusted sword. "Impressive." Ryan bowed, keeping his eyes lowered. "I am but a humble craftsman, my lord." "Humble, perhaps. But useful." The spymaster rose and circled the desk, his robes whispering against the floor. He stopped before a display case filled with ornate weapons, swords, daggers, and axes, each etched with runes. "The Duchy of Viridia grows restless. Their rebellion threatens the Empire's stability. We need to break their economy, flood their markets with arms of such quality that their own smiths become obsolete. You will forge them." Ryan's heart pounded. "My lord, I am but one man. Such a task would take years." The spymaster's smile widened. "You have a gift, boy. The Echo Forge. I know what it can do. You will imprint these weapons with the memories of defeat, of surrender, of despair. Their soldiers will lose heart before they even draw steel." A cold dread settled in Ryan's stomach. He had heard rumors of the Echo Forge's true power, but to use it for such cruelty. "I cannot." The smile vanished. The spymaster's eyes hardened like flint. "Cannot? Or will not?" He snapped his fingers, and a guard stepped forward, holding a scroll. "Your family resides in the eastern quarter, do they not? A mother, a younger sister. Such fragile things, families." Ryan's blood ran cold. He saw his mother's face, his sister's laughter, the small home they shared. The threat was clear: cooperate, or they die. He clenched his fists, nails digging into his palms. I will do as you command." "Good." The spymaster handed him a pouch of gold coins. "Your first payment. Begin immediately." He turned away, dismissing Ryan with a wave. As Ryan pocketed the coins, his fingers brushed against a scrap of iron he had hidden, a charm he had prepared earlier, just in case. He focused his will, letting the Echo Forge pulse through him. The cost was immediate, a sharp ache in his bones, a fleeting dizziness. But the charm grew warm, and he felt the spymaster's lie, the promise of freedom after the job, imprint into the metal. The truth revealed itself: the spymaster planned to kill him and his family once the weapons were delivered. 5 days of his life, traded for a sliver of knowledge. He turned to leave, his mind racing. The guards flanked him as he walked down the corridor, but a sudden presence made him stop. A woman stood in an alcove, her gown of emerald silk shimmering in the torchlight. Her hair was the color of autumn leaves, and her eyes held a knowing glint. The Princess of Viridia. She stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. "Your hammer is a legend, Smith. Use it wisely." Before Ryan could respond, the spymaster's voice cut through the hall. "Your Highness, you should not be here." The princess smiled faintly and retreated into the shadows. The spymaster's eyes narrowed as he watched her go, then fixed on Ryan with renewed suspicion. "You are dismissed. But remember, I have eyes everywhere." Ryan bowed and hurried out, the charm burning against his chest. He had gained a secret, but at what cost? The game had only just begun. The workshop was a tomb of iron and shadow. Ryan stood before the forge, its coals glowing like the eyes of a waking beast. The air was thick with the smell of heated metal and the acrid tang of his own sweat. He had been at work for 3 days straight, hammering out blades that sang with a false promise of victory. Each sword, each spear, each arrowhead was alive, forged into steel, imbued with memories of defeat, of rout, of the crushing weight of a lost battle. The spymaster wanted weapons that would break the spirit of the Viridian soldiers, and Ryan was giving him exactly that. But every strike of his hammer cost him a piece of his life. He could feel it in the ache of his bones, the gray at the edges of his vision. 16 days of lifespan gone, and the job was nowhere near done. His hands moved on instinct, the echo forge humming beneath his skin like a second heartbeat. He had learned to control it, to push the memories into the metal without letting them consume him. But the cost was always there, a silent debt he paid with every breath. He thought of his mother, her frail hands mending his shirt by candlelight. He thought of his sister, laughing as she chased fireflies in the garden. The spymaster had threatened them, and Ryan knew that threat was as real as the iron in his grip. He had to play this game, even if it meant losing himself piece by piece. The door creaked open, and a sliver of lantern light cut through the gloom. Ryan looked up, his hammer poised mid-strike. A figure stepped inside, cloaked in deep blue silk, her face hidden behind a veil of silver threads. But he recognized her instantly, the Princess of Viridia. Her presence was like a blade in the dark, sharp and unexpected. "You work late, Smith," she said, her voice soft but carrying an edge of steel. She moved closer, her eyes scanning the racks of finished weapons. "These are fine pieces. Almost a pity they will never see a true battle." Ryan set down his hammer, wiping the grime from his forehead. "Your Highness honors me with her visit. But this is no place for royalty. The fumes alone are nothing compared to the poison I breathe in court," she interrupted, pulling back her veil. Her face was pale, her eyes dark with a weariness that mirrored his own. "I came to thank you. For the charm." He stiffened. The charm, a scrap of iron he had imbued with the spymaster's lie. He had given it to her in the corridor, a silent warning. She had understood. "I know what he plans," she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The spymaster intends to use you and then discard you. But I also know what you carry. That hammer, it is more than a tool. It is a legend. The Echo Forge, they called it in old tales. A weapon that could shape reality itself." Ryan's heart pounded. "I don't know what you mean. You lie poorly, Smith." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I have seen the work of such a forge before. In the ruins of my homeland, there are inscriptions that speak of it. The one who wields it can bind memories into metal, but at a cost. You are dying, aren't you? Each strike steals a little more of your life." He said nothing. There was no point denying it. "I am not here to expose you," she said, stepping closer. "I am here to offer an alliance. The spymaster is my enemy as much as yours. Help me, and I will help you protect your family." Before he could respond, the workshop door burst open. A nobleman in crimson robes stormed in, his face twisted with outrage. Lord Aldrich Vane, a minor courtier with ambitions far beyond his station. He pointed a trembling finger at Ryan. "Treason," he shouted. "I saw her enter. The Smith conspiring with the enemy princess. Guards." Ryan's blood ran cold. This was it. The trap had sprung. He looked at the princess, who met his gaze with a calm that bordered on eerie. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Lord Vane," Ryan said, forcing his voice steady. "You misunderstand. Her Highness came only to inspect the quality of the weapons destined for her duchy. A routine check, nothing more." "Liar." Vane spat. "I heard every word. You speak of alliances, of enemies. You are a traitor, and I will see you hanged." Ryan's hand drifted to his belt, where a small, unfinished letter lay, a scrap of parchment he had been using to test a new alloy. It was blank, but that didn't matter. The Echo Forge did not require the metal to be forged into a weapon. Any object would do. He focused, pouring his intent into the paper. The cost hit him like a hammer blow, 15 days of his life, ripped away in an instant. He felt his knees weaken, but he held firm. "Lord Vane," he said, holding out the letter. "Before you call for my execution, perhaps you should read this. It arrived for you this morning. I was asked to deliver it. Vane sneered, snatching the paper. His eyes scanned it, and his face went white. The letter was no longer blank. It was filled with his own handwriting, detailing a scheme to embezzle funds from the Imperial Treasury. Every detail was perfect, every figure exact. It was a confession, written in his own hand, though he had never put pen to paper. This is a forgery. Vane stammered, his voice cracking. Is it? Ryan asked, his tone cold. I found it among your belongings. Perhaps you dropped it in your haste to accuse me. The Chancellor will be very interested to see it. Vane's eyes darted between Ryan and the princess. He knew he was beaten. If the letter reached the Chancellor, he would be ruined. He backed away, his hands shaking. This is not over, Smith. I will have my revenge. He fled, leaving the door swinging on its hinges. Ryan exhaled, his body trembling. The princess watched him, her expression unreadable. That was a clever trick. But it cost you dearly, didn't it? He nodded, too exhausted to speak. You have made a powerful enemy, she said. But you have also gained a friend. Remember that. She turned to leave, but paused at the door. Be careful, Smith. The game is only beginning. She disappeared into the darkness, and Ryan was alone again. He slumped against the anvil, his vision swimming. 15 days. He could feel them gone, as if a part of him had been carved away. He had bought himself a reprieve, but at what price? The silence of the workshop was broken by the sound of footsteps, heavy, measured, deliberate. Ryan looked up, and his blood turned to ice. Standing in the doorway was a man in black robes, his face gaunt and his eyes like chips of obsidian. The Grand Inquisitor. He held a lantern in one hand, and the light cast long, dancing shadows across the walls. Ryan, the smith, he said, his voice soft as a whisper, yet carrying the weight of a death sentence. You have 1 hour to prove your loyalty to the crown. 1 hour, or your family dies. He stepped aside, and Ryan saw them, his mother and sister, bound and gagged, held by 2 guards in the corridor. Their eyes were wide with terror. Ryan's heart stopped. The hammer slipped from his fingers, clattering to the floor. The Grand Inquisitor smiled, a thin, cruel line. The hour begins now. The Grand Inquisitor's boots echoed against the stone floor like a death knell. Ryan stood in the center of his forge, the heat from the dying coals licking at his back, while the man who could end his life with a single word studied him with eyes the color of frozen steel. The Inquisitor's black robes swept the ground, and a silver pendant, a stylized eye, hung from his neck, catching the dim light. You have 1 hour, apprentice, the Inquisitor said, his voice a low rasp that seemed to scrape against Ryan's spine. Prove your loyalty, or your family will be tried for treason by dawn. Ryan's throat tightened. He could still see the guards dragging his mother and sister from their home, their cries echoing in his skull. The spymaster's treachery, the princess's warning, the Chancellor's poison, all of it converged into this single moment. He had to survive. He had to protect them. I will forge a truth-seeker's ring, Ryan said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. A ring that glows when its wearer speaks falsehood. It will prove my worth to the court. The Inquisitor raised an eyebrow, the first crack in his icy composure. Such a thing exists. It will, in an hour. Ryan turned to his anvil, his heart pounding. He had no intention of creating a true truth-seeker. That would be suicide. The Inquisitor would test it on him, and the moment he lied about his knowledge of the Echo Forge, the ring would betray him. Instead, he would imprint the Inquisitor's own doubt into the metal, making it glow when the man himself questioned the ring's authenticity. A paradox that would prove the ring's power while ensuring his survival. He selected a bar of cold iron, its surface rough and unyielding. The fire roared as he plunged it into the coals, watching the metal blush orange. Sweat dripped from his brow, sizzling on the anvil. The cost of this deception weighed on him, 20 days of his life, stolen by the Echo Forge. But what was time compared to his family's lives? As he hammered the iron, shaping it into a band, he focused on the Inquisitor's face. The flicker of suspicion in those gray eyes. The slight twitch of his jaw when he spoke of loyalty. The way his fingers drummed against his thigh, betraying impatience. Ryan poured every shred of doubt, every unspoken question, into the metal. The ring would not detect lies, it would detect the Inquisitor's uncertainty. The hammer fell in rhythm with his pulse. Clang. 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 Each strike sent vibrations up his arms, and with each blow, he felt the years slipping away. His vision blurred for a moment, and he leaned against the anvil, gasping. The Echo Forge demanded its price, and Ryan paid it willingly. "You look pale, Smith," the Inquisitor said, circling him like a wolf. "Is the work too taxing?" "It's the heat," Ryan lied, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "The ring is almost ready." He filed the edges smooth, then polished the surface until it gleamed. The band was simple, no gems, no engravings, but it held a faint warmth that had nothing to do with the forge. Ryan held it up, watching the light dance across its surface. It looked like an ordinary ring, but within it, he had trapped a piece of the Inquisitor's own soul. "It is done." Ryan walked to the Inquisitor, the ring resting on his palm. "Place it on your finger. Speak a truth, then a lie. The ring will glow when you lie." The Inquisitor took the ring, his fingers brushing Ryan's. The touch was cold, like grasping a corpse. He slid it onto his index finger, and the metal seemed to pulse once, then settle. "The sky is blue," the Inquisitor said, his voice flat. The ring remained dark. "The moon is made of cheese." Nothing. Ryan's heart stopped. Had he failed? Had the imprinting not taken hold? But then the Inquisitor frowned, his eyes narrowing at the ring. "Are you certain this works?" he muttered, almost to himself. A faint glow emanated from the band, a soft, golden light that flickered like a candle. The Inquisitor's doubt had triggered it. He stared at the ring, his expression unreadable. Then he laughed, a dry, hollow sound that sent chills down Ryan's spine. "Extraordinary," the Inquisitor said, turning the ring on his finger. "You have proven your worth, apprentice. The court will be pleased." Ryan bowed, his knees weak with relief. "Thank you, Your Grace. But remember this." The Inquisitor stepped closer, his breath cold against Ryan's ear. "I'll be watching. Always. One false step, and your family's blood will stain the executioner's block." He turned and walked away, his boots echoing into the night. Ryan stood alone in the forge, the fire dying to embers. The ring's glow had faded, but the Inquisitor's words lingered like a curse. He had survived this test, but the game was far from over. As he slumped against the anvil, the cost of his deception settled into his bones. 20 days of his life, gone. He could feel the weight of them, like stones pressing on his chest. But his family was safe, for now. He looked at the dying fire and whispered to himself, one move at a time. The summons came at dawn, when the forge was still cold and the only light was the pale gray seeping through the high windows. Ryan had not slept. The ring sat on his workbench, inert now, but its memory clung to his fingers like a phantom heat. He had fooled the Grand Inquisitor, for now. But the Inquisitor's final words echoed in the quiet, "You will be watched, always." A liveried servant appeared at the door, his face a mask of porcelain indifference. "The Imperial Treasury requires your presence. You are to forge a gift for Her Majesty's birthday. You will report to Master Aldrich in the South Workshop." Ryan's heart seized. The Treasury. The spymaster's domain. He had hoped to lie low, to let the dust of the Inquisitor's visit settle, but the machine of the court ground on without mercy. He gathered his tools, the hammer, the tongs, the small pouch of rare metals he had hoarded from the last job, and followed the servant through the winding corridors of the palace. The South Workshop was a grand chamber, vaulted ceilings painted with scenes of imperial conquest, braziers casting long shadows across marble floors. A dozen smiths labored at their anvils, but their work stopped when Ryan entered. Eyes followed him, curious, envious, hostile. Master Aldrich, a stout man with a silver beard and hands scarred by a lifetime of fire, gestured him to a private alcove. "The Empress desires a hairpin," Aldrich said, his voice low. "Something elegant, but with hidden strength. The spymaster suggests a blade within the pin, but Her Majesty has refused all weapons. She wants beauty, not function." Ryan nodded, his mind racing. A hairpin. Close to the Empress's skin, her thoughts, her very breath. The Echo Forge hummed in his chest, a hunger that demanded payment. He thought of the Chancellor, of the poison that might already be prepared, of the spymaster's smile that promised death. He had to act. "I will forge it," Ryan said. "But I need privacy. The metal must be pure, and the design requires concentration." Aldrich studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. "The Treasury owns your time. Do as you wish, but deliver it by sunset." Alone in the alcove, Ryan lit his own brazier, feeding it with charcoal until the flames turned blue. He selected a bar of mythril, the last piece from the original job, and placed it in the fire. The hammer felt heavy in his hand, a weight that pressed against his soul. He began to work. Each strike was deliberate, a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. The metal glowed, softened, and began to take shape. But this was not ordinary forging. As the hammer fell, Ryan opened his mind, pouring his intent into the metal. He did not want to hear the Empress's thoughts, that was a violation, a sin, but he needed to know if she was in danger. He needed to feel the tremors of conspiracy before they struck. The hairpin formed slowly, a slender stem, curved at the end like a question mark, with a small blossom of silver petals at the top. In the center of the blossom, he set a tiny ruby, a drop of blood-red fire. The ruby was the key, it would resonate with the Empress's emotions, amplifying them until they were audible to him. As the final strike landed, a shock ran through Ryan's arm. The hairpin pulsed with a faint light, then dimmed. He felt the cost, a tug at his life, a thread pulled from the fabric of his years. 10 days. Gone. He wiped the sweat from his brow and examined the hairpin. It was beautiful, almost alive. The petals seemed to tremble in the heat, and the ruby glowed with an inner fire. He wrapped it in silk and delivered it to Aldrich, who nodded with grudging approval. The Empress will receive it at the evening banquet, Aldrich said. You are to attend. Ryan's blood ran cold. Attend? He was a smith, a nobody. Why would he be invited to the Empress's birthday? But he knew the answer, the treasury wanted him visible, wanted him close, wanted him to see what they would do. The banquet hall was a sea of silk and gold. Nobles in jeweled robes, courtiers with painted faces, servants weaving through the crowd with trays of delicacies. Ryan stood near a pillar, his rough tunic astain among the finery. He clutched a cup of wine he had no intention of drinking. The Empress entered, a vision in white and silver. Her hair was piled high, and nestled among the curls was the hairpin. The ruby caught the candlelight, sending tiny sparks across the hall. Ryan felt a faint hum in his mind, like a distant radio signal. He focused, and the hum sharpened into words. Asterisk, so tired of these fools. The Chancellor's smile is a knife. The spymaster's eyes are empty. Only the hairpin feels real, asterisk. Ryan blinked. He could hear her. The thought was clear, distinct, as if she had spoken aloud. He took a breath and steadied himself. The Empress moved to her throne, accepting gifts and greetings, but her thoughts continued, a stream of weary observation. Asterisk, Lord Harvin's daughter is pregnant again. She thinks no one knows. The Duke of Alara is plotting, but so is everyone, asterisk. Then the Chancellor approached. He was tall, silver-haired, with a smile that never reached his eyes. He bowed low and presented a golden goblet. Your Majesty, a vintage from the southern vineyards, aged 50 years. A toast to your health. The Empress took the goblet, her fingers brushing the rim. Ryan strained to hear her thoughts. Asterisk, the wine smells strange. Too sweet. But I cannot refuse in public, asterisk. Ryan's heart pounded. The Chancellor's smile widened. He was waiting, watching. The Empress raised the goblet to her lips. If only I had a reason to set it down. Ryan stepped forward before he could think. Your Majesty. The hall fell silent. Every eye turned to him. The Empress lowered the goblet, her brow furrowed. Who dares interrupt, the Chancellor snapped. Ryan bowed, his mind racing. Your Majesty, I am the smith who forged your hairpin. I beg a moment to explain its secret. The Empress's curiosity flickered. Asterisk, the smith. Why now, asterisk aloud, she said, speak. The ruby in the hairpin, Ryan said, his voice steady, is enchanted to detect poison. If any taint touches your skin, the ruby will darken. He had not told this lie before, but the truth was worse. I humbly ask you to test it, for your safety. The Chancellor's face tightened. This is absurd. The wine is pure. But the Empress held up a hand. She removed the hairpin and dipped the ruby into the goblet. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ruby turned black, a deep, oily void that swallowed the light. Gasps erupted. Guards rushed forward. The Chancellor stepped back, his composure cracking. This is a trick. The smith has poisoned the hairpin itself. Ryan met his gaze. The hairpin was forged before witnesses and sealed in a box until the banquet. If I had poisoned it, the ruby would have been black from the start. The Empress rose, her eyes cold. Arrest the Chancellor. Search his chambers. As the guard seized the Chancellor, he turned to Ryan with a smile that sent ice through the smith's veins. An excellent gift, he said, his voice low and smooth. I must commission one for my wife. The threat was clear. The Chancellor suspected. The game was no longer hidden. Ryan stood in the glittering hall, surrounded by nobles who now looked at him with a mixture of fear and awe. The hairpin glowed softly in the Empress's hand, a silent witness to the knight's betrayal. He had saved her life, but he had also marked himself. The spymaster would hear of this. The Inquisitor would have new questions. And the Chancellor, even in chains, had promised a reckoning. The forge awaited. But the fire in his heart was cold. The summons came at dawn, when the forge was still cold and the coals had not yet breathed their first sigh of heat. Ryan had barely slept, the Chancellor's parting smile still burned into his memory like a brand. Now a liveried servant stood at his door, holding a sealed scroll with the spymaster's personal seal, a coiled serpent eating its own tail. Ryan broke the wax with trembling fingers. The message was curt, come to the Eastern Tower. Bring your hammer. Do not keep me waiting. No signature was needed. The spymaster's reputation preceded him like a shadow before a storm. He gathered his tools, the legendary hammer heavy in his hands. Each step through the palace corridors felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers. The guards at the Eastern Tower let him pass without a word, their eyes fixed somewhere beyond his face, as if he were already a ghost. The spymaster's chambers were sparse, almost monastic. A single desk, a chair, and a rack of maps. The man himself sat in the shadows, his face half-lit by a guttering candle. He was older than Ryan had expected, with gray-streaked hair and eyes that seemed to weigh every breath. Close the door, the spymaster said, his voice a dry rasp. I have a commission for you. Ryan obeyed, his heart hammering. What does my lord require? Dice, the spymaster said, sliding a small leather pouch across the desk. Inside were 3 ivory cubes, their faces worn smooth by countless rolls. I need a set that always rolls in my favor. Can you do that? Ryan's throat tightened. The Echo Forge could imprint intent, but to guarantee luck was to cheat fate itself. He thought of the hairpin, of the Chancellor's suspicion. This was another trap, another test. But refusal meant death. I can try, my lord. The spymaster's lips curled into something that might have been a smile. Good. You have until sunset. Fail, and I'll have you thrown into the iron cells. Back in his forge, Ryan laid the dice on the anvil. They were ordinary, unremarkable. But the spymaster was anything but ordinary. This man had survived 3 purges, outmaneuvered a dozen rivals, and now held the reins of the Imperial Treasury's darkest secrets. If Ryan gave him perfect dice, he would become an even greater threat. But if he refused? He picked up his hammer. The Echo Forge flared to life, a warmth that spread from his chest to his fingertips. He focused on the spymaster's face, the way his eyes had flickered when he spoke of the dice. There was something there, a lie buried beneath the words. The spymaster didn't just want luck. He wanted control. Ryan struck the first die. The metal sang, and a memory poured into it, not of luck, but of truth. He imprinted the spymaster's own lies into the ivory, weaving them into the grain so that each roll would reveal a hidden deception. The cost was steep, 25 days of his life, draining away like water through a sieve. He gritted his teeth and struck again, until all 3 dice were forged. By sunset, they were done. The dice gleamed with an inner light, their surfaces etched with patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. Ryan carried them back to the Eastern Tower, his legs heavy with exhaustion. The spymaster took the dice without a word. He rolled them once, twice, 3 times. Each roll came up 6s. He smiled, a thin, predatory expression. Excellent. You have exceeded my expectations. But Ryan saw something else. As the dice tumbled, they whispered to him, fragments of the spymaster's thoughts, his plans, his betrayals. The man was a viper, and his fangs were aimed at the Empress herself. But worse, the dice revealed a secret so dark that Ryan's blood ran cold. The spymaster was working with the Duchy of Viridia. My lord, Ryan said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. I must speak plainly. The spymaster's eyes narrowed. Speak. I know about Viridia. Silence. The candle flickered, casting long shadows across the room. The spymaster's hand drifted toward a dagger on his belt. That is a dangerous accusation, Smith. It's not an accusation, Ryan said, stepping closer. It's a negotiation. You want the dice to work. They will. But I've also built a fail-safe. If anything happens to me, the dice will reveal every secret you've ever hidden. The Empress will know. The Chancellor will know. Everyone will know. The spymaster's face went pale. You're bluffing. Am I? Ryan held up one of the dice. Try me. Give the order to have me killed, and see what happens. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then the spymaster laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You have teeth, Smith. I underestimated you. Protect my family, Ryan said. Get me out of the capital when the time comes. In return, your dice will never fail you. The spymaster nodded slowly. Agreed. But if you breathe a word of this to anyone. I won't, Ryan said. We have an understanding. As he turned to leave, his eyes caught a letter on the desk, half hidden beneath a stack of reports. The handwriting was familiar, a scrawl he'd seen on orders from the Treasury. The words were clear: eliminate the Smith after the next shipment. Ryan's heart stopped. He kept walking, his face a mask of calm, but inside, the gears of his mind were turning. The spymaster had agreed to protect him, but the letter proved that the Treasury had already marked him for death. He was a dead man walking, and the only way out was to forge a path of his own. He stepped into the night, the dice heavy in his pocket. The game was far from over. The summons came at dawn, carried by a liveried servant whose boots left mud on the workshop floor. Ryan wiped his hands on his apron, the smell of coal and quenched steel clinging to him like a second skin. The servant handed him a sealed scroll bearing the Chancellor's personal crest, a silver fox coiled around a key. The message was brief: come to the North Tower. Bring your hammer. I have a commission that will test your craft. Ryan's fingers tightened around the parchment. The Chancellor. The man who had attempted to poison the Empress, whose schemes Ryan had glimpsed through the spymaster's dice. Now he wanted a drinking horn. A horn that would never break. He strapped the echo forge to his belt, the weight of it familiar and terrible. Each use cost him a piece of his life, but each use also bought him another day of survival. He had no choice. The Chancellor was too powerful to refuse, and too dangerous to ignore. The North Tower was cold, its stone walls sweating with damp. Guards flanked the door, their eyes tracking Ryan as he entered. The Chancellor sat behind a desk cluttered with maps and ledgers, a goblet of wine in his hand. He was a thin man with a predator's stillness, his smile never reaching his eyes. Ah, the Smith who makes miracles, the Chancellor said, gesturing to a chair. I have heard of your work. The spymaster's dice. The Empress's hairpin. They say your creations are unique. Ryan bowed. I do my best, my lord. I require a drinking horn. One that will never crack, never shatter, never tarnish. It must be worthy of the Emperor's table. The Chancellor leaned forward, his voice dropping. And it must be ready by the council meeting tomorrow. Ryan nodded, his mind already racing. A horn that never breaks. The Chancellor would use it to toast the Emperor, to prove his loyalty. But Ryan knew better. The Chancellor's treachery was a stain that could not be polished away. I will need access to your forge, my lord. And a sample of your own blood. The Chancellor's eyes narrowed. Blood? To bind the metal to your will. It ensures the horn resonates with its owner. Without it, the enchantment will not hold. It was a lie, but a necessary one. Ryan needed the Chancellor's essence to imprint the horn with the man's own treachery. The echo forge worked best with a piece of the target, hair, blood, a cherished object. The Chancellor's blood would carry his secrets. After a long moment, the Chancellor pricked his finger with a dagger and let a drop of blood fall into a small vial. Do not fail me, Smith. Ryan took the vial and retreated to the Chancellor's private forge. It was a gilded cage of a room, with imported steel and tools that had never seen real use. He built a fire, fed it with charcoal, and began to work. The horn was to be made of silver and gold, wrapped in a spiral of mythril wire. Ryan hammered the metal, feeling the heat seep into his bones. When the horn took shape, he placed it on the anvil and reached for the echo forge. The hammer hummed as he raised it, the air around it shimmering with heat. He brought it down, and the world dissolved. He saw the Chancellor's face, twisted with ambition. He saw the poison being poured into the Empress's cup. He saw the letter to the Duchy of Viridia, promising support for a rebellion. The Chancellor's treachery was a river of venom, and Ryan poured it all into the horn. When he finished, he was drenched in sweat, his hands shaking. The horn gleamed on the anvil, beautiful and innocent. But Ryan knew the truth. The horn would crack the moment the Chancellor lied in the Emperor's presence. The cost was 30 days of his life. He felt them slip away like sand through a sieve. But the horn was ready. The council meeting was held in the Grand Hall, a cavernous room of marble and gold. The Emperor sat on his throne, the Empress beside him. The spymaster lurked in the shadows. The Chancellor stood at the head of the table, the horn in his hands. "Your Majesty," the Chancellor said, his voice smooth as oil, "I present this horn as a symbol of my loyalty. It will never break, just as my devotion to the throne will never waver." He raised the horn to toast. The Emperor smiled, reaching for it. And the horn cracked. The sound was sharp, like a bone snapping. A fissure ran from the rim to the base, and from it seeped a dark, oily liquid that smelled of poison. The Chancellor's face went white. The Emperor's hand froze. "What is this?" the Emperor whispered. The horn began to speak. Not in words, but in images, visions that flickered across the marble walls. The Chancellor pouring poison into a cup. The Chancellor writing a letter to the Duchy of Viridia. The Chancellor plotting to seize the throne. The hall erupted. Guards seized the Chancellor, who was screaming denials. The Empress stared at Ryan, her eyes wide with understanding. The spymaster's face was unreadable. Ryan stood frozen, his heart pounding. He had done it. He had exposed the Chancellor. But as the guards dragged the man away, the Chancellor locked eyes with him. There was no fear in that gaze. Only a cold, calculating hatred. "You'll pay for this, Smith," the Chancellor hissed. "I know what you are. I know what you can do." Then he was gone, hauled away to the dungeons. But his words lingered like a curse. The Emperor praised Ryan, calling him a hero. The Empress offered him a position at court. But Ryan could only nod, his mind elsewhere. The Chancellor had escaped execution, he was too powerful to kill outright. He would be imprisoned, but that was not the same as dead. That night, Ryan returned to his workshop, exhausted and hollow. He lit a candle and sat at his bench, staring at the Echo Forge. 30 days. He had lost 30 days of his life. And for what? A temporary victory. He heard a rustle at the door. A piece of paper slid under the crack. He picked it up, his hands trembling. The note was written in a spidery hand, "You've made a powerful enemy. The Chancellor knows your secret." Ryan crumpled the paper. His heart raced. The Chancellor knew. How? Had the spymaster betrayed him? Or had the horn revealed too much? He looked at the Echo Forge, its surface gleaming in the candlelight. He had used it to survive, but each use cost him more than he could afford. And now, the Chancellor, a man with endless resources and a grudge, knew what he was. The candle flickered. Outside, the city slept. But Ryan knew he would not sleep tonight. He had won a battle, but the war was far from over. The note was a scrap of cheap parchment, the ink still wet when Ryan peeled it from the floorboards. The words were blocky, deliberate, a hand that didn't want to be recognized. "The Chancellor knows. He will come for your blood. Move before dawn." Ryan's breath caught in his throat. He crushed the note in his fist, the paper crackling like dry leaves. The forge fire popped and hissed, casting long shadows across the walls of his cramped workshop. Outside, the bells of the Temple of the Eternal Flame tolled the 3rd hour of the night. 3 deep, mournful chimes that seemed to echo in his bones. He didn't have time to wonder who sent the warning. The Chancellor's escape from execution had been a farce, a staged prison break that put him back in the shadows, more dangerous than ever. And now that Viper knew what Ryan could do. The Echo Forge. The hammer that could imprint memories into metal. The weapon that had exposed the Chancellor's plot and cost Ryan 30 days of his life. His family. His mother. His younger sister, Lyra. They were still in the cramped apartment above the shop, sleeping in the narrow beds that smelled of rust and old straw. If the Chancellor sent men, assassins, inquisitors, or worse, they would be the first to die. The treasury had made that clear from the start, one wrong move, and the axe falls on the neck of the ones you love. Ryan moved through the workshop like a ghost, his hands steady despite the tremor in his heart. He grabbed a half-finished carriage key from the workbench, a simple iron blank, still rough from the file. The metal was cold against his palm, waiting to be shaped. But this wouldn't be an ordinary key. It would be a key that could open any lock, a key that carried the memory of a royal courier who had passed through every gate, every door, every secret passage in the capital. He built the forge fire high, the coals glowing like the eyes of a demon. The hammer felt heavy in his hand, the echo forge, its head scarred from 100 imprints. Each use cost him a piece of his life, but what was a few more days compared to the lives of his mother and sister? Ryan closed his eyes and reached into the memory. The royal courier, a man named Aldrich, who had served the Empress for 20 years. Ryan had seen him once, striding through the palace corridors with a leather pouch slung over his shoulder, a ring of keys jangling at his belt. The guards parted for him like water. He had the authority to go anywhere, to unlock anything. And Ryan had watched him closely, memorizing the way he held himself, the confident tilt of his head, the way his fingers found the right key without looking. He didn't have Aldrich's blood. But he had the memory. And with the echo forge, that was enough. The hammer came down. The ring of metal on metal filled the workshop, a sound that seemed to hang in the air like a held breath. Ryan's vision blurred, and he felt a tug at the core of his being, a cold, pulling sensation that drained the warmth from his skin. 10 days. He could feel them slipping away, like grains of sand through an hourglass. But he didn't stop. He struck again, and the key began to take shape. The iron twisted, forming teeth that seemed to writhe like living things. The memory of Aldrich's authority flowed into the metal, binding itself to the grain. Ryan's hands shook. His breath came in ragged gasps. The forge fire flickered, and for a moment, he thought he saw the courier's face in the flames, a stern, weathered face with eyes that held the secrets of the palace. Then it was done. The key lay on the anvil, glowing faintly with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Ryan picked it up. It was light in his hand, almost weightless, but he could feel the power humming inside it. The memory of every lock it could open. The ghost of every door that would yield to its touch. He didn't waste time. He climbed the creaking stairs to the apartment, his steps careful on the worn wood. The door to his mother's room was ajar. He could see her sleeping, her face lined with worry even in rest. Lyra was curled up beside her, a thin blanket pulled up to her chin. "Mother," he whispered, shaking her shoulder. "Wake up. We have to go." She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Ryan? What's wrong?" "The Chancellor. He knows. We have to leave the capital tonight." His mother didn't argue. She had lived through enough purges, enough betrayals, to know when to move. She woke Lyra with a gentle hand, and the girl's eyes went wide with fear. "Where are we going?" Lyra asked, her voice small. "Somewhere safe," Ryan said. "I have a key that will get us out." They packed in silence. A few clothes. A pouch of coins. The small iron box that held his father's tools. Ryan watched the window, his heart pounding at every creak of the building. The streets were dark, the lanterns extinguished for the night. But he knew the treasury's men could be anywhere. In the shadows. In the alleys. Waiting. They slipped out the back door, into the narrow passage that led to the stables. The carriage was old, the wood warped, the wheels squeaking. But it would have to do. Ryan helped his mother and Lyra inside, then climbed onto the driver's seat. The horses snorted, restless, as if they sensed the danger. The gates of the artisan quarter were closed, barred with an iron beam that could only be lifted by the night watch. But Ryan didn't need the gate. He knew a secret passage, a forgotten tunnel that led from the old tannery to the river road. It was narrow, dark, and smelled of damp stone and rat droppings. But it was the only way out without passing the guards. He guided the carriage through the winding streets, his hands tight on the reins. The horses' hooves clattered on the cobblestones, the sound echoing off the walls. Ryan's eyes darted left and right, searching for any sign of pursuit. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and the only light came from a single lantern swinging from the carriage's side. They reached the tannery. The building was abandoned, its roof caved in, its walls covered in black mold. Ryan pulled the carriage to a stop and jumped down. "Stay here," he said. "I'll open the passage." He found the hidden door behind a pile of rotting leather. It was a heavy slab of oak, bound with iron bands, its lock rusted and swollen. Ryan pressed the key into the keyhole. For a moment, nothing happened. The lock groaned, refusing to turn. Then the key glowed, and the memory of Aldrich's authority surged through the metal. The lock clicked. The door swung open, revealing a dark tunnel that sloped downward into the earth. "Go," Ryan said, helping his mother and Lyra down from the carriage. "Follow the tunnel. It will take you to the river road. From there, head east, to the village of Oakhaven. There's a woman there, Mira, who owes me a favor. She'll hide you." His mother clutched his arm. "What about you?" "I'll be fine. I have to stay. If I leave now, they'll hunt us all down. But if I stay, I can buy you time." Lyra started to cry. "Ryan, please. No. Go. Now." He pushed them into the tunnel, pressing the key into his mother's hand. "Take this. It will open any door you find. Don't stop until you reach Oakhaven." His mother kissed his forehead, her lips cold. Then she took Lyra's hand, and they disappeared into the darkness. Ryan watched until the lantern light faded, swallowed by the tunnel's depths. The door swung shut, and the lock clicked into place. He stood there, alone in the abandoned tannery, the smell of decay filling his lungs. The forge fire in his chest had gone cold. He had lost 10 more days of his life. But his family was safe. Or so he thought. He turned to leave, to return to the workshop and face whatever came next. But as he stepped into the street, a figure emerged from the shadows. Tall. Cloaked in black. A silver amulet glinting at his throat. The Grand Inquisitor. "Your family is safe," the man said, his voice smooth as a blade sliding from its sheath. "But you are not." Ryan's hand went to the hammer at his belt. The echo forge was warm, almost eager. But the Grand Inquisitor didn't flinch. He simply smiled, a thin, cold expression that held no warmth. "I've been watching you, Smith. I know what you did. The hairpin. The dice. The drinking horn. You've been playing a dangerous game, and now the board has changed." Ryan's heart hammered in his chest. "What do you want?" "The truth. About the hammer. About your power. About every secret you've imprinted into metal. You will tell me everything, or I will burn your workshop to the ground and salt the earth where it stood." The Grand Inquisitor took a step forward, and the shadows seemed to close in around them. The night was cold, silent, save for the distant howl of a dog. Ryan's fingers tightened on the hammer's handle. He had one chance. One strike. But against an Inquisitor, even the Echo Forge might not be Eno. The Grand Inquisitor's voice cut through the forge's oppressive silence like a blade drawn across stone. His robes, black as the void between stars, whispered against the soot-covered floor as he stepped closer. The fire in the hearth cast long, dancing shadows across his gaunt face, revealing the deep lines carved by years of suspicion and judgment. Ryan's arm, still aching from the previous night's work, trembled as he set down his hammer. The echo forge pulsed beneath his ribs, a second heartbeat thrumming with the weight of secrets. He had known this moment would come, the moment when the mask of a simple smith would crack, and the truth would spill out like molten iron. "I don't know what you mean," Ryan said, his voice steady despite the cold sweat trickling down his spine. He reached for a rag to wipe his hands, buying time. "I'm just a blacksmith, Your Grace. I forge tools and trinkets. Nothing more." The Inquisitor smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was the smile of a predator who had already cornered its prey. He produced a small object from within his robes, a hairpin, delicate and gleaming, the very one Ryan had forged for the Empress. The firelight caught its surface, revealing faint, swirling patterns that seemed to move like smoke trapped in amber. "This hairpin," the Inquisitor said, holding it up between thumb and forefinger, "allows the wearer to hear the thoughts of those nearby. A clever trick, but not one that escapes my notice." He let the hairpin dangle, its tip catching the light. "And the dice set for the spymaster. It reveals lies. The drinking horn for the Chancellor. It cracks when he plots. You've woven a web of enchantments, Ryan, and now the spider is caught." Ryan's breath caught in his throat. The Inquisitor knew. Not just about the objects, but about the Echo Forge, the power that had cost him days of his life, weeks, months. He could feel the weight of those lost days pressing down on him, a debt he could never repay. "I don't know what you're talking about," Ryan repeated, but his voice wavered. The Inquisitor stepped closer, his presence filling the forge like a suffocating fog. You have a choice, Smith. Confess everything, and I may show mercy. Refuse, and I will dismantle your life piece by piece. Your mother, your sister, they are not as far as you think. Ryan's blood ran cold. He had sent them away, through the secret tunnel to Oakhaven, but the Inquisitor's words suggested he knew more. The carriage key, the one he had imprinted with the memory of a royal courier, had it been traced? He forced himself to breathe, to think. What do you want from me? Ryan asked, his voice barely a whisper. The Inquisitor's smile widened. I want a weapon. A blade forged with your unique talents. One that can kill the Emperor. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Ryan stared at the Inquisitor, his mind racing. This was a trap, it had to be. The Inquisitor served the Emperor, or so everyone believed. But here he was, speaking of regicide as if it were a simple transaction. Why? Ryan asked, his voice steadier now. Why would you want the Emperor dead? The Inquisitor's eyes flickered, a brief crack in his composure. That is not your concern. Your only concern is whether you wish to live. Ryan's hand drifted to the Echo Forge, the phantom warmth of its power pulsing in his palm. He could feel the Inquisitor's emotions, fear, ambition, a hunger for control. The man was terrified of the Emperor, but not enough to stop plotting. He wanted a weapon, but he also wanted to see if Ryan would betray the crown. I'll do it, Ryan said, his voice flat. I'll forge your weapon. The Inquisitor nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Ryan's. Good. I will return at dawn. You have until then. He turned and walked toward the door, his robes swirling behind him. But as he reached the threshold, Ryan spoke again. Wait. The Inquisitor paused, glancing back over his shoulder. I need something of yours, Ryan said, his heart pounding. A token. Something personal. The forge requires a connection to the wielder to attune the weapon properly. It was a lie, but a plausible one. The Echo Forge could imprint memories into any metal, but it worked best with an emotional anchor. And Ryan had no intention of forging a weapon for the Inquisitor. He would forge something far more dangerous. The Inquisitor studied him for a long moment, then reached into his robe and pulled out a ring, a simple band of silver, worn smooth by years of wear. He tossed it to Ryan, who caught it with trembling fingers. Use it wisely, the Inquisitor said, and then he was gone, the door creaking shut behind him. Ryan stood alone in the forge, the ring cold in his palm. He could feel the echoes of the Inquisitor's life within it, the fear of the Emperor, the paranoia, the desperate need for control. But beneath all that, a deeper truth, the Inquisitor was terrified of his own weakness. Ryan placed the ring on the anvil and picked up his hammer. The Echo Forge roared to life, its power surging through his veins. He focused on the Inquisitor's fear, the way it coiled around his heart like a serpent. He poured that fear into the ring, shaping it, tempering it with the heat of the forge. Sweat poured down his face as he worked, the hammer striking the ring again and again. Each blow cost him a sliver of his life, a day, an hour, a minute. He could feel the years slipping away, but he couldn't stop. The ring began to glow, a faint, pulsing light that mirrored the Inquisitor's heartbeat. When he finished, Ryan collapsed against the anvil, gasping for breath. The ring lay before him, cool and still, but alive with the imprint of the Inquisitor's fear. It would glow whenever the Inquisitor lied or plotted, revealing his true intentions to anyone who wore it. Ryan picked up the ring and slipped it onto his finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had always been meant for him. He stared at it, watching the faint glow dance across its surface. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Suddenly, the door burst open. The Inquisitor stood there, his face twisted into a grin. He had not left at all, he had been watching from the shadows. You think a ring can stop me, he said, his voice dripping with mockery. I've already poisoned your forge. The metal you've been working with is laced with a slow-acting toxin. By dawn, you'll be too weak to lift a hammer. Ryan's blood ran cold. He looked at the ring, now glowing a deep, angry red. The Inquisitor was telling the truth. But I'll still need you alive to forge the weapon, the Inquisitor continued, stepping closer. So I'll give you the antidote, after you finish the blade. Ryan's hand tightened around the ring. He had one move left, one chance to turn the tables. But as he opened his mouth to speak, a wave of dizziness washed over him. The forge spun, and he stumbled, catching himself on the anvil. The Inquisitor laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the forge. "You have until dawn, Smith. Choose wisely." He turned and vanished into the night, leaving Ryan alone with the poison seeping into his veins and the ring glowing like a dying ember on his finger. The first light of dawn had barely touched the ash-choked sky when Ryan stumbled back to his forge. The door hung askew, its iron hinges twisted as if by a giant's hand. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of scorched metal and something else, something acrid, like burnt hair and bile. His heart hammered against his ribs as he pushed through the wreckage. The anvil lay cracked, its face split by a deep fissure. The bellows were shredded, leather strips scattered like dead snakes across the dirt floor. The quenching trough had been overturned, its water soaking into the ground in a dark stain that seemed to grow as he watched. But it was the forge itself that made him freeze. The fire pit was cold, but the stones around it were blackened with a residue that shimmered with an oily sheen. The Grand Inquisitor's poison. The metal he had been working with, the iron, the steel, even the charcoal, was tainted. Ryan touched a fragment of broken steel and felt a sharp tingle in his fingertips, a warning that the Echo Forge recognized as danger. He had less than a day. The Inquisitor's words echoed in his mind, "By dawn, or your family burns." But this forge was dead. Every tool, every scrap of metal, every piece of fuel was poisoned. He could not work here without killing himself slowly, and he could not work elsewhere without materials. Ryan's hands trembled as he sifted through the rubble. His mother's locket, the one she had given him when he left for the capital, was still warm against his chest. He thought of her face, of his sister's laughter, of the small garden they tended behind their cottage. They were the only reasons he was still breathing. He found it buried under a collapsed shelf, a piece of the original mythril sword. The blade he had reforged from the junk sword, the one that had started this nightmare. It was only a shard now, no longer than his hand, but it pulsed with a faint blue light when he touched it. The Echo Forge recognized it as pure, untainted by the poison that had seeped into everything else. Ryan cradled the shard like a dying bird. He had no forge, no tools, no fuel. But he had this one piece of mythril, and he had his own blood. The Echo Forge did not require a traditional forge to work, it required intent, memory, and sacrifice. He had all three. He found a flat stone in the corner, one that had been spared the poison. He placed the mythril shard on it and knelt, closing his eyes. The memory he needed to imprint was not his own. It was the truth of the imperial treasury, the corruption, the lies, the schemes that had cost thousands of lives. He had seen it in the spymaster's eyes, heard it in the Chancellor's whispers, felt it in the Grand Inquisitor's cold hands. He began to hammer. Not with a tool, but with his own fist, his knuckles splitting against the mythril. Each strike cost him a piece of his life, and he felt the years bleeding away like water from a cracked vessel. But he did not stop. The shard began to glow, then to grow, extending into a shape, a dagger, simple and unadorned, but sharp enough to cut through any lie. The cost was 15 days of his life. He felt them leave him, a weight lifting from his shoulders even as his body grew weaker. But when he opened his eyes, the dagger was complete. It hummed with a quiet resonance, a truth so pure it seemed to vibrate in the air around it. Ryan picked it up, and for a moment, he saw everything clearly. He saw the spymaster's betrayal, the Chancellor's poison, the Grand Inquisitor's fear. He saw the path forward, narrow and treacherous, but possible. Then he heard the footsteps. They were not the heavy boots of guards or the soft tread of servants. These were the measured, deliberate steps of trained killers. He looked up to see shadows moving outside the broken door, their forms blocking the first rays of sunlight. A voice cut through the silence, smooth and cold as a blade. "The spymaster sends his regards." Ryan's hand tightened around the dagger. He had no way out. The forge was destroyed, his tools were gone, and his family was a hostage to the Inquisitor's will. But he had the truth, and he had a weapon that could cut through any lie. He smiled, though it was a grim thing. "Tell the spymaster," he said, his voice steady, "that I have a gift for him." The first agent lunged from the shadows, a curved blade aimed at Ryan's throat. Ryan sidestepped, the truth dagger singing as it met the assassin's steel. The clang echoed through the destroyed forge, and for a heartbeat, the man's eyes widened, he saw his own lies reflected in the blade's surface. A flicker of hesitation, a stumble, and Ryan drove the dagger into his shoulder. The man screamed, not from pain, but from the sudden, unbearable weight of every deception he had ever spoken. He collapsed, writhing. Two more came. Ryan moved like water, the dagger a part of his arm. Each parry, each thrust, carved away their falsehoods. One agent dropped his weapon, sobbing, confessing to a murder he had committed years ago. The other fled into the night, his mind broken by the truth he could no longer hide. Ryan stood alone, breathing hard, the dagger pulsing with a cold light. He did not wait. The spymaster's chambers were in the Imperial Treasury's east wing, a labyrinth of marble and lies. Ryan walked through the corridors, the dagger in his hand, and the guards parted before him. They saw his eyes, they saw the truth in his steel, and they dared not block his path. The door was oak, banded with iron. Ryan kicked it open. The spymaster sat behind a desk of black mahogany, a goblet of wine in his hand. He was older than Ryan remembered, with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. He did not rise. "Ah, the little smith. I wondered when you'd come." Ryan stepped forward, the dagger raised. "Your lies end here." The spymaster laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "You think you can cut through me with a piece of metal? I have woven webs that would choke an empire. You are a fly, caught in silk." Ryan did not answer. He lunged. The spymaster was faster than he looked. He drew a thin rapier from beneath his desk, the blade singing as it met the truth dagger. Sparks flew. The two circled, the room silent save for the scrape of steel and the pounding of Ryan's heart. "You have no idea what you are doing," the spymaster hissed. "The treasury is not a single enemy. It is a hydra. Cut off one head, two more grow. You will die, and your family will burn." Ryan felt the words like poison, but the dagger pulsed in his hand. He saw the truth beneath the threat, fear. The spymaster was afraid. He pressed the attack, driving the older man back against the wall. "Tell me," Ryan said, his voice low. "Tell me everything." The spymaster's eyes darted to a hidden lever on the desk. Ryan slashed, and the dagger caught the man's wrist. Blood welled, but more than blood, a torrent of confessions. The spymaster screamed, his mind flooded with every lie he had ever told, every plot he had ever woven. He fell to his knees, babbling. "The Chancellor, he planned the poisoning, he framed the Duke, he is even now in the Duchy of Viridia, with fire and sword." Ryan stepped back, the dagger's glow fading. He had what he needed. He sheathed the blade and walked to the door, where two Imperial guards now stood, drawn by the commotion. "Arrest him," Ryan said, pointing at the spymaster. "He has confessed to treason against the crown. The Empress will hear of this." The guards hesitated, then moved. They bound the spymaster's hands, dragging him from his own chambers. As they passed Ryan, the spymaster's head snapped up. His eyes were clear again, and there was a terrible smile on his lips. "You think you've won, little smith," he whispered, his voice a thread of malice. "The Chancellor is already in the duchy. He's going to burn everything. Your family, your friends, the entire Duchy of Viridia. And when the smoke clears, he will come for you." The guards pulled him away, his laughter echoing down the hall. Ryan stood alone in the abandoned chamber, the truth dagger cold against his hip. He had exposed the spymaster, but the cost was written in the grey strands now visible in his hair. 25 days of his life, gone. And still, the Chancellor moved like a shadow toward his family. He had to move. He had to forge something new. Something that could stop a fire before it began. But first, he had to survive the night. The road to Viridia was a ribbon of dust and broken stone, winding through hills that had once been lush with vineyards. Now the vines were withered, their blackened tendrils clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. Ryan pulled his hood lower, the truth dagger a cold weight against his thigh. The spymaster's arrest had bought him time, but not much. The Chancellor was already here, and every mile closer to the duchy's capital felt like a step into a snare. He passed through the first checkpoint at dusk. The guards were Viridian loyalists, their armor patched and faces gaunt from months of siege. They eyed his travel-worn cloak and the imperial seal he'd forged, a crude copy, but enough to pass. "State your business," the captain said, his hand resting on his sword. "I'm a courier from the capital," Ryan said, keeping his voice steady. "Message for the Chancellor." The captain studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Move along. And pray you don't catch the plague that's rotting this land." Ryan's stomach tightened. The Chancellor wasn't just here to burn the economy, he was poisoning the land itself. The thought made his fingers itch for his hammer. He found lodging in a tavern called the Rusted Plough, its sign hanging by a single chain. The innkeeper was a heavy-set woman with tired eyes and a voice like gravel. "You're late," she said, sliding a bowl of thin stew across the counter. "The Chancellor's men already came through. Took half the grain stores for imperial requisition." "When?" "3 days ago. They're camped at the old fortress north of town. Planning something big, I hear." Ryan ate in silence, the stew tasteless on his tongue. The truth dagger hummed faintly against his leg, as if sensing the lies that festered in this place. He needed to see the Chancellor's operations firsthand. But more than that, he needed a weapon, something that could turn the Chancellor's own greed against him. The idea came to him as he stared into the dying embers of the hearth. A seal. The Chancellor's personal seal, used to sign decrees and treaties. If he could forge a copy, he could undo the Chancellor's plans from within. But to do that, he needed to imprint the seal with the Chancellor's essence, his greed, his hunger for power. And that required getting close enough to touch something the Chancellor had touched. He waited until midnight, then slipped out of the tavern. The fortress was a dark silhouette against the stars, its walls lit by torches that cast long, dancing shadows. Ryan moved like a ghost, keeping to the alleys and empty streets. The truth dagger guided him, its edge pulsing with a faint blue light that only he could see. He found the Chancellor's tent at the center of the camp, surrounded by guards. But the guards were tired, their eyes heavy from the late hour. Ryan circled around, using the dagger to cut a slit in the tent's canvas. He slipped inside, heart pounding. The Chancellor was asleep, his breath a low rumble. On a table beside him lay a stack of documents, each bearing the crimson imprint of his seal. Ryan's hands trembled as he pressed a blank sheet of vellum against one of the seals, transferring the faint residue of ink and wax. It wasn't enough, he needed more. He needed the Chancellor's own hand. He found it in a discarded glove, still warm from the Chancellor's touch. Ryan pressed it to his chest, feeling the echo forge stir within him. The cost would be steep, 30 days of his life, maybe more. But there was no other way. He retreated to a dark corner of the camp, where he'd hidden his forge tools in a saddlebag. The process was agonizing. He heated the metal blank over a small flame, then pressed the glove against it, willing the Chancellor's greed to flow into the forging. The metal screamed as it took shape, the seal's design emerging in perfect detail. But with each strike of his hammer, Ryan felt a piece of himself drain away, a day, then another, then another. His vision blurred, and his hands shook, but he didn't stop until the seal was complete. By the time he finished, he could barely stand. The seal was flawless, identical in every way to the Chancellor's own. But the cost had left him hollow, his breath shallow and his limbs heavy. He used the seal that very night. He forged a treaty, a false one, promising the duchy's surrender in exchange for peace. The Chancellor's signature was a perfect mimicry, the greed imprinted in the ink making it almost alive. Ryan sent the treaty to the Viridian Council through a trusted courier, knowing it would buy him precious time. But as he watched the courier ride away, a cold hand gripped his shoulder. He turned to find the Chancellor standing behind him, his face twisted in fury. "You've signed your death warrant, Smith," the Chancellor hissed, his eyes burning with rage. "I don't know how you did it, but I'll have your head for this." Ryan's hand went to the truth dagger, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. The Chancellor's guards were already closing in, their swords drawn. The game was over. All he could do now was run, and pray he could reach the capital before the Chancellor's blade found his neck. The forge's fire had long died to embers, casting the smithy in a dim, orange glow. Ryan sat on a stool, wiping the last traces of iron dust from his hands, when the door creaked open. He didn't look up. "The Chancellor's men," he muttered, his voice hoarse from the day's work. "I told you, the seal is done. Take it and leave. It's not the Chancellor who seeks you." The voice was soft, yet carried the weight of command. Ryan's head snapped up. The Princess of Viridia stood in the doorway, her cloak dusted with snow, her eyes gleaming like twin swords in the firelight. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "You're a hard man to find, Smith. But I've been watching." Ryan's hand instinctively moved toward the hammer at his belt. "Your Highness. I thought you'd be celebrating the treaty." "A treaty signed with a false seal?" She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I know what you did. The Chancellor's greed imprinted into wax. Clever. Dangerous. But not enough." She walked closer, her boots echoing on the stone floor. "You have the echo forge, don't you?" The hammer that can imprint memories into metal. I've heard the legends. My grandmother spoke of it before she died. She said it would come to a smith who could hear the whispers of iron. Ryan's blood chilled. He had never told anyone the hammer's true name. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me. Her voice hardened. I've seen the work. The truth dagger. The hairpin that lets the Empress hear thoughts. The dice that reveal lies. You're not just a blacksmith, you're a weapon. And I need you to forge one for me. For what? Ryan asked, his throat dry. To end this war. She pulled a bundle from under her cloak and unwrapped it on the workbench. Inside lay a bell, small and unadorned, made of tarnished bronze. This bell once hung in the Emperor's chambers when he was a boy. He gave it to my grandmother, a commoner from Viridia. She was his first love. Before politics, before the throne, before he became a monster. He forgot her. But I remember. Ryan stared at the bell. You want me to imprint a memory into this? A memory of love? Yes. The memory of her laughter. The memory of him holding her hand under the cherry blossoms. The memory of a moment when he was human. If he hears that bell ring, it will awaken something he's buried deep. He'll call off the war. He'll spare Viridia. It won't work, Ryan said, shaking his head. The Emperor is surrounded by sycophants. They'll never let him hear it. Then you'll have to make sure he does. She met his eyes. I know the cost. My grandmother told me. Every imprint drains life from the smith. But you're already dying, aren't you? I can see it in your hands. The tremble. The gray at your temples. You're running out of time. So use what's left to save thousands. Ryan looked at the bell, then at his own reflection in its tarnished surface. He thought of his family, of the noose waiting if the Chancellor won. He thought of the children of Viridia, who would burn if the war continued. How do I know this memory is real, he asked. Because I carry it in my blood. The princess touched her chest. My grandmother is dead. But before she died, she gave me a lock of his hair, a letter, and that bell. She said, when the time comes, find the smith who can hear iron. He will know what to do. She pulled a worn envelope from her cloak and handed it to him. Inside was a faded sketch of a young man and a girl laughing under a tree. The resemblance to the Emperor was unmistakable. Ryan's hands trembled as he held the sketch. It will cost me 40 days, he whispered. Maybe more. Then forge it. And if you die a hero. He took the bell. The metal was cold, but as he held it, he felt the faintest pulse, a memory trapped in the bronze, waiting to be freed. He placed it on the anvil and raised the echo forge. The hammer came down, and light exploded through the smithy. Memories flooded his mind, a young prince running through a field of wildflowers, a girl with braided hair laughing, their hands intertwined, the taste of stolen kisses under the moonlight. Then the pain came, a searing fire in his chest, as if his heart were being carved out. He saw his own life flicker, his mother's face, his father's pride, the day he was cast out of the guild. All of it burned away, feeding the bell. When the light faded, Ryan collapsed to his knees. The bell lay on the anvil, glowing with a soft, golden warmth. The princess picked it up. Thank you, she said, her voice breaking. You've given us hope. She left without another word. Ryan sat alone, gasping, his hands blackened with soot and blood. He had bought time for Viridia, but he had paid with his own flesh. Days passed. The Chancellor raged, demanding Ryan's head. But before the execution could be ordered, a messenger arrived from the capital. The Emperor had called off the invasion. Touch him, and you'll answer to the Emperor. The Chancellor hesitated, his blade trembling. You think the Emperor will protect a traitor? I think the Emperor will protect the man who reminded him of his humanity. She didn't flinch. Leave this place, or I'll carve your heart out and feed it to the crows. The Chancellor's face contorted, but he lowered his sword. This isn't over, Smith. He spat on the ground and stalked out into the night. Ryan slumped against the wall, his breath ragged. The princess turned to him, her eyes soft. You're safe now. For a while. Thank you, he whispered. Don't thank me yet, she said. The Chancellor will find another way. And when he does, you'll need to be ready. She left, and the smithy fell silent. Ryan stared at the echo forge, still warm in his hand. The cost was mounting. But for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. He had saved Viridia. Now he had to save himself. The Chancellor's sword gleamed in the dim forge light, its edge catching the embers like a serpent's tongue. Ryan stood his ground, the truth dagger cold against his palm. The blade was no ordinary weapon, it was forged from the Chancellor's own lies, each strike a confession waiting to be drawn. "You think you can protect her," the Chancellor hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "You're nothing but a smith playing at politics." Ryan didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward, the dagger cutting through the air. The Chancellor lunged, his sword aimed at Ryan's heart. But Ryan twisted, the truth dagger parrying the blow with a sound like breaking glass. Sparks flew, and for a moment, the forge's heat seemed to pulse with the memory of every betrayal the Chancellor had ever committed. "You poisoned your own brother," Ryan said, his voice steady. "You sold secrets to the Viridians. You planned to kill the Empress." The Chancellor's eyes widened. "Lies," he screamed, but the dagger hummed, and a faint image flickered in the air, a shadow of the Chancellor handing a sealed letter to a Viridian spy. The Chancellor stumbled back, his face pale. What is that?" Ryan advanced, the dagger weaving patterns of light. "This is the truth. Every lie you've told, every secret you've buried, it's all here." He swung again, and the blade caught the Chancellor's sword, sending it clattering to the ground. The Chancellor fell to his knees, his hands trembling. "Please," the Chancellor begged. "I have gold. I have power. I can make you rich beyond your dreams." Ryan shook his head. "Your greed is the only chain you understand." He knelt, pressing the dagger's tip to the Chancellor's chest. The blade pulsed, and a chain of light emerged, each link a memory of the Chancellor's avarice. The chain wrapped around him, binding his arms and legs. The Chancellor struggled, but the chain tightened. "You can't do this. I am a noble of the imperial court. And I am a smith who forges the truth," Ryan replied. He stood, stepping back as the duchy's guards entered the forge. The princess followed, her eyes cold as she watched the Chancellor being dragged to his feet. "Take him to the dungeons," she ordered. "He will answer for his crimes." The Chancellor thrashed, his voice cracking. "The Emperor will never forgive you. You betrayed the crown." Ryan felt the weight of those words, the cost of his actions settling in his bones. 20 days of his life gone, stolen by the forge's hunger. But as he watched the Chancellor being hauled away, he knew it was worth it. The truth was a weapon more powerful than any sword. The princess turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You've made an enemy of the entire court." "I've made an enemy of liars," Ryan said. "That's a battle I'm willing to fight." She nodded slowly. "Then we have much to prepare. The Chancellor's allies will not rest." Ryan looked at his hands, the calluses and scars a testament to his craft. He had started as a disgraced apprentice, but now he held the secrets of the powerful. The game was far from over. But for now, he had won this move. The forge's fire crackled, and the truth dagger hummed softly, ready for the next lie it would cut through. The capital's gates loomed before Ryan like the jaws of a beast, their iron teeth wet with the morning mist. He had ridden through the night, the princess's parting words still echoing in his skull, "The Chancellor's allies will not wait. They will strike where you are weakest." His family. His forge. His life. But when he crossed the threshold into the Aurelian streets, the silence struck him first. No merchants hawking their wares. No children chasing stray dogs. Only the hollow clatter of his horse's hooves on cobblestone, and the distant, mournful toll of a bell. He dismounted at the forge, his hands trembling as he pushed open the door. The coals were cold. The anvil sat untouched. A single piece of parchment lay on the workbench, weighted by a chisel. He picked it up, his eyes scanning the spidery script, "The Empress is dying. Come to the palace. Now. The spymaster. Or a trap." But the word Empress burned through him like a branding iron. He had heard her thoughts through the hairpin, her loneliness, her fear, her desperate love for a people her husband bled dry. She was the only noble who had ever shown him kindness, even if unknowingly. Ryan ran. Through the winding streets, past the guards who recognized him as the treasury's smith and let him pass, up the marble steps of the imperial palace. The halls were choked with courtiers in mourning black, their whispers a swarm of locusts. He pushed through them, ignoring their stares, until he reached the Empress's chambers. 2 guards crossed their spears before the door. No one enters. The Emperor's orders. I am her smith, Ryan said, his voice steady despite the fire in his chest. I forged her hairpin. She would want to see me. The guards exchanged glances. One of them shrugged. He's treasury. Let him in. What harm can a blacksmith do? The door swung open, and Ryan stepped into the room. The Empress lay on a bed of silk, her face the color of ash, her breath a shallow rattle. A physician stood by her side, shaking his head. The poison has spread to her lungs. She has minutes, at most. Ryan knelt beside her. He took her hand, cold as the metal he shaped, and pressed the hairpin into her palm. The echo forge flared to life, and he heard her thoughts, not as words, but as a cascade of images and emotions. A child laughing in a garden. A crown placed on a reluctant head. A husband's cold shoulder. A decree signed in blood. And then, the final memory, the Emperor himself, pouring a dark liquid into her wine goblet. You know too much, my dear. The people love you more than they love me. That cannot stand. Ryan's blood turned to ice. The Emperor had ordered her death. Not the Chancellor. Not the spymaster. The man who wore the crown. The Empress's eyes fluttered open. She looked at him, and for a moment, she smiled. You heard it all, didn't you? She whispered. The truth. Yes, Ryan said, his voice cracking. Then forge me a bell, she said. A bell that will ring with my love for this land. Let it be my last gift to the people. And let him hear it, and know what he has done. She closed her eyes. Her hand went limp. Ryan did not weep. He had no time for tears. He returned to his forge, his mind a storm of fury and grief. He gathered the purest bronze, the finest silver, and a handful of iron from the chains that had bound the Chancellor. He melted them together, the flames roaring as he poured his own life into the metal. Each strike of the hammer was a heartbeat. Each curve of the bell was a memory. The Echo Forge demanded its price, 50 days of his lifespan, but he paid it without hesitation. For 3 days and 3 nights, he worked. He did not eat. He did not sleep. He only forged. The bell took shape, its surface etched with the Empress's favorite flowers, her children's names, and a single line from her diary: the crown is heavy, but the people's love makes it light. On the 4th morning, he carried the bell to the palace tower. The guards tried to stop him, but the spymaster appeared, his eyes dark with understanding. Let him pass, he said. Let the bell ring. Ryan climbed the tower, the bell heavy on his shoulders. He set it in the belfry, tied the clapper to a rope, and pulled. The sound that erupted was not a chime. It was a song, a woman's voice, warm and clear, singing a lullaby. The Empress's voice. It echoed across the capital, filling every alley and courtyard. The people stopped. They listened. And they wept. In the throne room, the Emperor heard it. He rose from his seat, his face pale. The song twisted into words, the Empress's final thoughts: I loved you, even as you killed me. I loved the people, even as you bled them. Forgive him, my children. He knows not what he does. The Emperor collapsed. His guards caught him, but he pushed them away. He walked to the balcony, looked out at the sea of faces, and saw the truth in their tears. He had murdered the only soul who had ever loved him. He had destroyed his own kingdom. That night, the Emperor abdicated. He named the spymaster as regent, a man Ryan had once feared, but who now bowed to him in the shadows. You have done what no army could, the spymaster said. You have broken the crown. Ryan said nothing. He gathered his family from the safe house the princess had arranged. They slipped through the city gates as the new regent was crowned, the palace bells still ringing the Empress's song. Ryan looked back once. The palace was burning, not from fire, but from the light of 1,000 torches held by the people, celebrating their freedom. Father, his daughter whispered, tugging his sleeve. Are we free? Ryan looked at the flames, at the smoke rising like a prayer. No, he said, his voice soft. But we will be. My greatest work is yet to come. And he turned away, the road ahead dark and uncertain, but his heart lighter than it had been in years. The forge was behind him. The world lay ahead.